Today, we are beginning a new series, a new story, and guys, to be honest, I think this is one of the most real things that we can talk about today. This is a story of how we are united even though we are in great isolation and separation. This series is going to bring us from isolation to comfort and from confession to hope. As you look around the room, you may see family members or friends or maybe even no one. And we can all agree that at sometimes we feel alone and completely isolated. And for me, the effects of this virus are just starting to set in. I look around and see our countries and our families, and it's not getting easier. The pain is rising. And each family and person is starting to separate themselves more and more from each other. Some of you may have found comfort in Netflix or food or YouTube or whatever it is. Or maybe you spent the last week inside your head, all alone. Personally, I have spent way too much time watching Netflix or YouTube or playing games, and I've done everything I could possibly do to distract myself from the reality that is beginning to set in. And the truth is, guys, those things that we're doing, the things that I'm doing, are only isolating myself more and more from my family and my friends and the God that is ever present. So this series, United Thru, is the story of how we are united even in the beginning with isolation. Isolation is the complete separation from all things, that feeling of being truly alone. And whether you love being surrounded by people like an extrovert, or whether you are one who likes to be alone as an introvert, as I am myself, being isolated is not a feeling we want to strive for. Being isolated is not a feeling that we want for the rest of our lives. And today, we are dealing with what feels like forced isolation. And so often in life, when something is taken away from us that we were taking for granted, we begin to realize how amazing that thing actually was, or that person actually was, or maybe even that opportunity was. So with all that we're doing to slow down the speed of the coronavirus, all of us, me and you guys, are experiencing some form of isolation and some form of quarantine. As a result, we are beginning to realize how precious each one and every opportunity is. So I want to share a story for you guys of a time where I felt isolated. And it starts with the opposite of isolation. When I was in college, I would spend my whole summer working at summer camps. And so as I was working at camp, I was constantly surrounded for 10 weeks with staff, with campers, and with God, and I felt comfortable. I felt safe, and I felt surrounded by love. And that's an amazing experience until you realize that experience is going to be cut and end. So at the end of the 10 weeks, camp just ended. And I hated that feeling. I hated knowing that each one of us was going back to their home or to their school or whatever it is, and felt alone and felt isolated from the community that we had built. And so there was one summer with our final week of campers, we were sitting there in worship in one of the final days, maybe it was Wednesday, and the campers left on Saturday, and I was just hit with every single feeling I was telling you. I didn't want it to end. I walked out of worship and sat on a bench and I cried for hours because I was not ready to leave that. I was not ready to be isolated. And that's when I knew it was coming. With this virus, we didn't know this was coming. Even if we paid attention, we weren't quite sure it was going to hit and impact us this much. And so one of the things about isolation, though, is that we can get tempted and begin to feel as if we are isolated from God. That you are being isolated from God for something that you've done, or maybe you feel like you're pushing God away from you today. I don't want that for you or for me. And so I want to look first to the Bible to see what it can tell us about isolation, to see what it can tell us about being alone. So isolation and the wilderness are all over the Bible, and in many cases we get stories of Jesus among many others going alone to talk to God, to pray, or to just be. Today we're going to look at two quick stories about isolation. So in Exodus 19, we get a portion of the story with Moses and God. And God has set apart Mount Sinai, or in other words, God has isolated Mount Sinai as a place for God and Moses to meet. But hear this right, it was only for God and Moses. So hear these verses 20 through 23. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. The Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses walked up. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and tell the people not to break through and look at the Lord, for then many of them would be destroyed. Have the religious leaders who can come near to the Lord set themselves apart to be holy, or the Lord will go against them." Moses said to the Lord, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you told us, set places around the mountain that must not be passed, and set it apart as holy. So in these verses, we catch a glimpse of a story where people are being isolated and separated from God. Now Moses was allowed to come in because he was holy, but the other people were not, because they would have been destroyed. Now maybe it's just me, but if I was a follower of God and walking with Moses through the desert, I would have wanted to meet God too. I would have wanted to walk through. Now I don't know if that would have destroyed me, but that's what I would have wanted. So now for the second story, and it comes from Matthew verse 5. This is the story of Jesus on a mountain. Jesus saw many people. He went up on the mountain and sat down. His followers came to him, and he began to teach them. Now what's the difference here? Yeah, it's shorter. In the first story, we get a message of God coming down and meeting with Moses, but nobody else. And then this next story, we get a message of Jesus walking up the mountain and inviting people to come with us. And he teaches them. So the difference here that I'm getting is Jesus. In the second story, we get a story of Jesus with them before they even get to the mountain. He walks with them up the mountain, and he sits down with them, and then he begins to teach them. So Jesus, in his birth, entered into our world. He entered into our isolation from God and became the way for us to meet God on top of Mount Sinai. If you are feeling isolated in this very moment, if you're feeling isolated from God, I want you to reflect upon this. Jesus broke the separation. Jesus broke that isolation from God. And Jesus is the one who is inviting you to walk up that mountain together. He is with you before the mountain starts. So he is with you in the lowest valley and walks with you up the valley and up to the mountain and teaches you. Jesus unites us with God and with each other and is paving a new way for us into tomorrow. So in this time when you are feeling isolated from God or from people, I want to encourage you to go to the one who can break all isolation, Jesus.